Hi, I'm Tyler, and this is the Sharpshooter, teaching you valuable skills to make better videos. Today, we're comparing two video lenses, the modern DZOFilm 20 to 70mm cinema lens and a vintage Canon 9 to 117mm B4 broadcast lens. Both lenses zoom, are parfocal, have manual controls, and large apertures. But the DZO sells for about $1,600 new and $1,300 used. The Canon sells really cheap, anywhere from $50 to $200. I picked up mine for $100, which included the optional lens hood and a servo motor. Each one has its pros and cons, which we'll discuss in detail, and then I'll show you 4K video samples from both lenses using a Panasonic GH4. Let's start with the DZO. It's a modern lens introduced around 2019. The official model name is the Linglung 20 to 70, and as the name suggests, it's a 20 to 70mm focal length, which is a 40 to 140mm full frame equivalent. It's also parfocal, meaning it has a constant aperture throughout its focal length, and it will maintain its focus as you zoom in and out. The lens has a T2.9 aperture and a 12-blade iris, which is manually controlled with an iris ring. Lastly, zoom and focus are manually controlled by their respective rings too. The lens has no automatic or electronic controls. Like other cine lenses in this price point, it comes with a basic lens cover but no other accessories. Personally, I wish it came with a basic lens hood, but it doesn't. Fortunately, the front of the lens is threaded and accepts standard 77mm filters, so you don't necessarily have to use a matte box, but let's be honest, most people buying this lens are professional filmmakers and they're going to be expecting to use a matte box. Now, let's look at the Canon. This model is the J13X9BR II-A. As part of the model number suggests, it has a 13x zoom range. Like the DZO, it's parfocal. The aperture range is f1.6 to f16, which is manually controlled with an iris ring. And like the DZO, zoom and focus are controlled by their respective rings too. It's what I would consider to be a vintage lens. I'm not sure when it was released, but based on other broadcast cameras I've used in the past, I would imagine it's at least 25 to 30 years old. Wait a minute, I'm 32. Does that mean I'm vintage? It has a B4 mount, which is common on broadcast and ENG style cameras, but it's not going to fit our modern Micro Four Thirds camera without an adapter. Fortunately, there's pretty good aftermarket for those mount adapters. Today, I'm going to show you the most basic adapter I could find, which sells on eBay for about $60. There are several options, and some come with more functionality, which we'll talk about later. The Canon's focal length ranges from 9mm wide to 117mm tight, but full disclosure, that length is rated for its native 2/3 inch mount found on the broadcast cameras it was designed for. So take that with a grain of salt when trying to figure out the conversion factor for your camera. What I can tell you is, compared to the DZOFilm lens, it shoots a little bit wider and a little bit tighter, so there's more zoom range. Another factor that throws off the focal length conversion on this particular lens is that it's equipped with a 2x optical extender. And here's something important to remember. As with any lens, there's an inverse relationship between focal length and exposure. In this case, the extender doubles the focal length, so that means you lose about half of the light coming into the lens before it reaches its sensor. When comparing it to the DZOFilm lens with a 2x extender engaged, you're losing about 4 stops of light with the Canon, and that's a lot. That might be disappointing to some of you using this lens, but you've got to keep in mind, these lenses were designed for ENG broadcast cameras. ENG meaning electronic news gathering. I used to be a videographer for a TV station, and I used those extenders to get a tight shot of something that was physically really far away. I remember using it when shooting minor league baseball games. so I could get a close-up shot of the pitcher, although I was standing way out in the stadium. In that case, I didn't care about losing light. I jack up the gain, drop my shutter speed, and open the iris. It might not have been a film-worthy shot, but it got the job done for the evening news highlights. All that's to say, this lens wasn't designed for modern cameras. And here's another thing you'll have to overcome if you plan to use it. Once you mount it onto your camera, you'll notice it vignettes pretty badly because the projected image from the back of the lens is only meant to cover small sensors, usually for standard definition cameras. The good news is that you have two options to overcome this obstacle. One, you can engage the extender, which will double the projected image size from the back of the lens, and it will cover your sensor. The downside is that you're going to need to compensate for losing that light, so you'll be shooting with wide apertures, low shutter speeds, and potentially higher ISOs. While that might work for your style of shooting, it is limiting, and that sweet spot on this lens isn't wide open. It tends to look just a tad soft, but it does sharpen up after f2.8. Or you can go with option 2. A lot of you are going to cringe when I say it, but trust me, it can work with great results. Many cameras have a built-in teleconversion feature, which is similar to a digital zoom. This feature is referred to by different names among different manufacturers. Panasonic calls it extra teleconversion, and it's abbreviated as EX Teleconv in the camera's menu, which I can verify on the Panasonic GH4. JVC calls it variable scan mapping, which I can verify on the GY LS300. It works by resizing the image frame to a smaller portion of your sensor. But there are limitations. When using the Panasonic GH4, it's only effective when shooting 1080p mode for this lens. If you're shooting in 4K, you won't lose the vignetting. Either way you decide, I would only suggest buying a vintage B4 lens that has a 2x extender. There are many flooding the market without the extender, and they tend to be cheaper. But if you buy one, you're probably going to be disappointed based on what we just talked about. And I shouldn't have to say this, but I will. Don't buy either of these lenses using Sony or Canon cameras because they don't play nicely with micro four thirds. Another cool function the vintage Canon lens may have, depending on which one you buy, is a servo. That's a little motor that smoothly engages the zoom ring on the lens and can zoom out or zoom in at variable speeds. If you plan to use the servo, you might consider buying this PowerLinks mounting kit, which comes with a portable power supply for the servo system, so you can use it on the go. The power cable for the servo system is called a 12-pin high-rose connector. You can find adapters for an affordable price on eBay if you want to power the servo in a different way. Lastly, on the Canon, you can typically find one with a lens hood. The lens hood has a threaded front that accepts 86C filters, and that's an 86mm size, and the C stands for coarse threads. Although they're not common on modern cameras, you can find 86C filters used on eBay or new from camera shops like B&H. However, being a filter this large and unusual means you're going to pay more since there's less demand. And you cannot attach screw-in filters without the lens hood. Another feature both lenses have is manual back focus adjustment. This is critical to ensuring each lens can produce sharp images with a number of cameras that have different sensor placements. So, where can you find these lenses? You can pick up a brand new DZOFilm on B&H or find them used on several camera store websites. There's a lot of options. But the Canon's availability is limited to sites like eBay. It goes without saying, the DZOFilm has a significant advantage when it comes to mounting to the camera. For many people, it's worth paying more for something you won't have to fool around with. But if you like to tinker, you're a cheapskate like me, or you have some of these lenses laying around from vintage equipment, you might have some fun and realize you can bring new life to an old broadcast lens. Alternatively, if you're looking for zoom lenses with constant apertures that are not parfocal, I would highly suggest exploring the Panasonic Lumix 35-100mm f2.8 or the Olympus M Zuiko 40-150mm f2.8 Pro. They're excellent lenses that are designed specifically for the Micro Four Thirds system. Each of those lenses are lighter and more portable than the DZO or Canon, and in my opinion, they're more practical. Now, let's take a look at what you've been waiting for and watch some samples from each lens. Again, I'm shooting on two Panasonic GH4s with identical settings and 4K resolution at 24 frames per second. Each of the lenses has a simple UV filter on the front. The camera mounted with the DZOFilm lens is shooting without any modifications. The camera mounted with the Canon lens is using the 2X optical extender. I'm Tyler, and this is The Sharpshooter, teaching you valuable skills to make better videos. Thanks for watching.